This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Frantic rescue efforts in Mexico City after a metro rail line collapse killed at least 23 people. At least 12 people killed in an attack on Burkina Faso village. And coronavirus infections in India soar past the 20 million mark as the army and young medical students are mobilized to help stop its deadly second wave. Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. Also coming up this hour, South Africa's power utility faces off with unions over salary hikes. In sports, former head of global athletics Lamine Dia cleared to return home in Senegal after 6 years in France. We begin with developing news from Mexico City, where the death toll from the collapse of a metro overpass Monday night has risen to 23. Rescue efforts continue. Around 70 others were injured when train carriages plunged to the ground. Emergency crews are combing through the wreckage to look for survivors. The overpass was part of the metro system's Line 12, which was completed in 2012. Alasdair Baverstock reports from Mexico City.
We see fire crews continuing to pull people from the wreckage even 2 hours afterwards. This entire train is still in a very serious state and people continue to be trapped inside. And of the people who are being pulled out, they are going straight into ambulances and being taken straight to the hospitals. In 2012, it was finished in 2012, and though it was partially closed in 2014, just because of shoddy construction work, and reopened fully again in 2017. And one of the main factors here which people believe to have caused this is problems following earthquakes. Mexico, and particularly Mexico City, is very active seismologically. There's a lot of earthquakes here. The last big one we had was in 2017, so earthquakes are seen as a cause here, but for the moment blame is not the concern here. What the concern is now is saving as many lives as possible.
Let's go to Burkina Faso, where at least 12 people have been killed in an attack on a village in the east. Authorities say the Monday attack occurred in the village of Hantukura, which is near the border with Niger. Witnesses say the number of casualties could be as high as 30. The region's governor said in a statement that 10 civilians and 2 members of a local defense militia are among the dead. The attackers have not been identified and investigations are underway. Jihadist groups with links to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State have been active in the area. These groups have been blamed for fueling tensions between nomadic and farming communities in the wider Sahel region. For more on the insecurity in Burkina Faso and the Lake Chad region, we are joined now by Dr. David Zumenu, a senior researcher in the West Africa team at the Institute for Security Studies. He joins us via Zoom from Pretoria. Dr. Zumenu, thank you for your time this afternoon. What do you think is fueling the current spate of killings in Burkina Faso?
Good morning. Good morning to the viewers. The recurrence of attacks in Burkina Faso could be explained by at least 3 factors. They simply brought to the fore the continuous absence of a state in those areas where violent extremist groups continue to wreak havoc, putting at risk the life of their citizens. It also highlighted the fact that the security forces are not able to really develop an effective response mechanism to what is happening. And finally, there seems to be a problem in terms of relation that should exist between the state and the citizens. Instead of delegating the security responsibility to civilians to control the country, they still need to do more. And this what is at the root cause of this recurrent attack. In addition to that, you also have sometimes extremist group wanting to show that they remain alive they want new provision, or they want to acquire weapons, or they want to retaliate for alleged injustice that some of their members, of the community have been a victim of. And so you have a myriad of reasons why we continue to face this threat to the security of the state and the security of the citizen.
Niger also has had news of killings. Over 16 soldiers killed on Saturday. Nigeria and Chad also reporting killings and violence. What's your take on the situation in that corner of the continent?
I think that shows simply that sporadic deployment is not the answer to the persistent security threat that those countries are facing. It also shows that they need more structured, more coordinated, common actions to be able to come to terms to those violent extremist groups. The absence of coordination, communications, intelligence sharing, and common offensive measures in addition to some structural measures in terms of how do we redeploy and make permanent the presence of the state in rural areas, in areas far from the capital cities, to protect the citizens remain key in our attempt to eradicate the phenomenon of extremist violence in our country.
All right, Dr. David Zumenu, thank you very much for joining us. On to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where military administrations will now be in charge in the provincial governments of Ituri and North Kivu. The forces are replacing civilian authorities as part of measures to end growing insecurity in the provinces. The move comes just days after government declared a state of siege in the two regions, which will last for 30 days starting Thursday. According to a report published in March by the UN Refugee Agency, the Allied Democratic Forces armed group has increased its attacks in the region since the beginning of this year. Nearly 200 people have been killed, dozens others injured, and around 40,000 displaced. U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, begins a tour of the continent today. Feltman is expected to visit Egypt, Eritrea, Ethiopia and Sudan. His trip will run until the 13th of May. He's expected to hold meetings with government officials, the United Nations and the African Union. The visit to Eritrea will be the first in years by an American official. Libya's Foreign Minister Najla Al-Manqoush has urged the withdrawal of foreign fighters in the country as it prepares for elections. The North African country, however, defended the presence of Turkish troops in its country. The UN Security Council has been calling for the departure of all foreign fighters, saying it's the only way forward for Libya after years of violence. The Security Council estimates that there are more than 20,000 foreign fighters and mercenaries in Libya.
We also stress the importance of Turkey's contribution in stopping the war and consolidating the ceasefire, and we call on it from this forum to take steps to implement all the provisions of the Berlin Conference and the Security Council resolutions, and to cooperate together in regard of ending the presence of all foreign forces and mercenaries on Libyan lands in order to preserve the sovereignty of all Libyans.
The purpose of this visit is to show our support to the Presidential Council once again and our support for the unity government. Our support paved the way for a permanent ceasefire to continue the political process, as well as to give the opportunity to form the current Presidential Council and the government of the national unity.
This is Africa Live. Let's take a quick break. Coming up. Coronavirus infections in India passed 20 million as the army and young medical students are mobilized to help stop the spread. And surviving climate change, we take you to the Kenyan coastline where efforts are on to save critical mangrove forests.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
we celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, the latest COVID-19 update in India. The country's health ministry on Tuesday said the number of cases has surged past 20 million. More than 357,000 new infections and over 3,400 deaths were reported in the past 24 hours. Experts worry that the caseload could rise to 500,000 daily infections within 2 weeks. The hard-hit capital of New Delhi has called in its army to help with logistics, and the government has allowed medical students to help in the fight. Shweta Bajaj has the latest from New Delhi.
Big hospitals scrambling for oxygen. You know, it's been over 10 days now since Delhi has been in really this sort of a deluge. And yes, it could have been blamed in the beginning of this crisis that this is happening because the government did not anticipate that so many people would be needing oxygen. Yesterday, at least 3 large hospitals in Delhi, which had over 100 patients each on oxygen, were requesting the government on social media through all their contacts, big people in the Indian sort of policy sector, trying to ask the government to make sure that they get oxygen. Some of them did get oxygen, and thankfully all of that, the demand was met. But the fact that they were left with about less than an hour to go before the oxygen finishes, the kind of panic which is created in situations in hospitals that are anyway dealing with such a huge crisis, it's been a tough time here really. On the contrary, if you were to look at India's financial capital, Mumbai, the government there has managed the crisis very well. It was way worse in Mumbai than in Delhi when all this started on between the 12th and 14th of April. But since then, things in Mumbai are looking much in control. The government there got a centralized number, got a war room which was operational where people could call up to get oxygen, beds, drugs. So sort of they kept the panic going low, and at this point in time, there is a possibility of someone getting a bed in a hospital in Mumbai. But unfortunately, in India's financial capital, if I was to look at the state of Uttar Pradesh, where things could even get worse in the coming days, things really out of control.
South Africa's COVID-19 vaccine program is getting a boost. The first consignment of Pfizer jabs has arrived and is being checked before distribution. It will strengthen the first phase of the country's rollout targeted at healthcare workers. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
South Africa has received the first batch of over 300,000 Pfizer vaccines. This is in addition to 500,000 single-shot Johnson & Johnson's vaccines, which have trickled in over the last 3 months. A quarter of the country's healthcare workers have so far been vaccinated. The arrival of Pfizer should help speed this up.
Receiving the Pfizer vaccine means that we now have options for completion of the healthcare workers. We've so far vaccinated about just over 300,000 healthcare workers. We still have roughly 1 million healthcare workers to vaccinate.
South Africa's stocks will significantly be boosted over the next few months. 4.5 million Pfizer jabs are expected by the end of June, while the first delivery of Johnson & Johnson's shots being produced locally will be made soon.
I think that when we receive the first consignment from Aspen for Johnson & Johnson, we are going to see a much more accelerated process of vaccination in the country, bringing in more sites, increasing demand, and there will be a rapid unfolding of vaccinations.
The country is preparing to rope in the private sector to scale up vaccinations as the second phase gets underway later this month.
What for us becomes a responsibility as a province is to ensure that all vaccination sites are ready when that vaccine arrives, or when we get a go-ahead for the vaccines, especially as it relates to beginning to vaccinate the elderly in particular, so working closely with old age homes as well and other stakeholders.
Electricity shortages will also play a role in the transportation and storage of Pfizer vaccines, which need to be kept in ultra-cold conditions.
We expect Pfizer to be used more in the urban settings, where facilities for storage would be available and where we expect that people might be able to return for the second dose. In rural areas where we may not have facilities for cold chain and access is difficult to healthcare, the single dose Johnson & Johnson is probably going to be the predominant vaccine of choice.
South Africa's vaccine program is finally gathering momentum after a slow and bumpy start. It will, however, be mindful of more variants circulating in other parts of the world as it tries to protect its own population. Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Let's revisit one of our top stories this hour. And U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, begins a tour of the continent today. Feltman is expected to visit Egypt, Eritrea, Ethiopia and Sudan. His trip will run until the 13th of May. He is expected to hold meetings with government officials, the United Nations and the African Union. And that visit to Eritrea will be the first in years by an American official. So let's get more details from our reporter Adel Mahroui. He's live for us from Cairo. Adel, what are the issues we expect to be discussed during this trip by the U.S. envoy to Africa, and why these 4 countries?
Well, Beatrice, Jeffrey Feltman comes right after his appointment by 10 days, and he begins his African tour. If you take a look at about the countries selected, he's the envoy to the Horn of Africa. He's also stopping by in Egypt as well, and that makes it quite clear that one of the main topics that he will be discussing is the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dome, particularly that the visit comes after the Egyptian ambassador in the U.S. has called for the White House's intervention or assistance for a solution after the talks led by the African Union stumbles. That's in addition, of course, to the situation in the Tigray and as well as the tension around Eritrea. So there is a number of issues that are on the negotiating and the talks table that he will be leading in the region. But it is quite clear in terms of having Egypt included in this tour is that the Nile water talks will be the prime concern for the new envoy.
All right, Adel, thank you for that update. Adel Mahroui live in Cairo. The Democratic Republic of Congo and Guinea have begun recruiting volunteers to test a new COVID-19 drug for treating patients with mild to moderate forms of the coronavirus. The study, known as Anticov, is reported to be the largest clinical trial in Africa for COVID-19 treatments. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
The Anticov study is a drug trial that was launched in Africa last September. It focuses on using cheap drugs to keep patients with mild to moderate symptoms of COVID-19 out of hospital. Researchers in the DRC and Guinea have started recruiting participants for the trial. The DRC has already enrolled more than 150 patients. Other African countries like Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Ethiopia and Kenya are also expected to join in the trial. The health experts will test a combination of 2 drugs to try and stop the replication of the virus. Both drugs, nitazoxanide and cyclosonide, are already commercially available and will be affordable and easy to administer if shown to be effective against COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on the economy and healthcare systems of many African countries. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Learning institutions in South Sudan are reopening their doors this week for the first time in 15 months. Schools were closed in March last year as a measure to curb the spread of COVID-19. The government is, however, warning that if there is an increase in cases of COVID-19, it will impose another lockdown and close schools once again. CGTN's Patrick Oyet has more.
At the Juba One Boys School, students are celebrating their reopening.
So our government, they don't for us a good thing and open for us in school. Our staying at home is not fine. Many of us, especially we girls, we have get pregnant, some of us have get married, and that's not good. I'm very glad they opened for us in school and we are back to learn.
South Sudan's government says COVID-19 infection rate is now at 3%. That's the lowest since it imposed the lockdown a year and 3 months ago. But it is warning that more needs to be done to keep the schools open.
Each one of us has to play a role that is divided to personal level. where you have to make sure that you are wearing the mask, you are washing your hands, and you are keeping social distancing. That is the only message I want to give, because it will keep our school open.
South Sudan's government says it lacks funds to buy hand sanitizers, soap and face masks needed in schools across the country. The UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, says it is donating 900,000 face masks to schools. The UN says South Sudan has one of the lowest literacy rates in the world, with only 27% of the country's population able to read and write. And South Sudan's government still faces many challenges to providing much needed education.
Army took school as barracks. 3 displaced people reside in some of the schools. 4 public universities are operating at premises belong to general education in the states.
The UN is urging the government to address the issue of insecurity for children across the country to have access to learning institutions. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
To our series on surviving climate change. Today, we head to Kenya, where mangrove forests are considered as guardians of the coastline. These trees stabilize the coastline by reducing erosion from storm surges and tides. Mangroves play an important role in fighting climate change. In today's episode of Surviving Climate Change, CGTN takes a look at mangrove conservation on Kenya's eastern coast.
If we are to imagine a situation without the mangroves, that would mean there will be more cases of global warming, because there'll be a high amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Another situation without the mangroves is Gazi, being known as a community that is highly dependent on the fishery sector, then that would mean there will be a reduced productivity in the amount of fish that is caught, which will in turn greatly affect the livelihoods of the local communities. My name is Rahma Rashid Kivugo. I am 24 years old. I currently work with the Mikoko Pamoja Community Organization, which is the first community-led project in the world to engage in the sale of mangrove carbon credits. So basically, the project is located in the southern coast of Kenya, that is in Gazi Bay. We started working as a project in the year 2013. So basically, what Mikoko Pamoja does is conserve and protect the mangrove ecosystems. We work with 2 communities, that is the Gazi and the Makongeni communities. These are small villages constituting of about 6,000 people. Mangroves are known to be the 3rd most productive ecosystems after the seagrasses and the salt marshes. They usually aid in the absorption of CO2 and other related greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. They are known to sequester or absorb up to 8 times more than other terrestrial ecosystems or other terrestrial forests. One, they are a habitat for the different marine species available in the ocean. They're also responsible for acting as a natural wall that shields the coastline against cyclones or flooding and all that. They're also known to serve as a protecting ground for the young fish against the predator fish. Generally, I can say that they have both ecological and economic factors, economic benefits that they bring to the people around them or the biodiversity around it.
We have many types of the mangroves, but there are some which are best for the sucking of the carbon. Like this one I'm showing you, this is the best one, which sucks the carbon 5 times than any other tree, this type of mangrove here. And this is the type also we have to find the seedlings and we plant them there for in the nursery. After some months, we take them away again. We're going to plant them in the other gardens there. But the challenge is when you plant 4,000 of them, may remain about 1,000, 1,500 because some die, some go with the water. That is the challenges. Because the seed of this is just like this thing here. The seed of like this, just like this. When it drops down, yeah, when it drops down, when it is stuck there, then it keeps growing already. Yeah, yeah. It's like that, just like this one. When it drops, yeah, but when it drops like that, it stands still. It's already growing in. When we sell the carbon to Plan Vivo, they do their calculation for money. I think what I forgot, because for the first time when we received this money, it is when we knew that, oh, we used to cut the mangroves, we spoiled them for the firewood and for the building the houses, but now we can get money and we can decide to do our things. That is the day which I won't forget. We have improved because now the mangroves are, even the acres now we had before, there are now many of the mangroves which are growing up. Because now it's about 3 years we are closed down, no cutting, no anything from the central government. So it's nice for us because the acres which we keep them, they are now doing very well. And when we're going for monitoring there, we go for checking there, things are not bad. I think some years coming, the forest of mangrove will be very big. And that is why every year we have to plant some more mangroves.
Basically, mangroves are usually degraded by both natural and human-induced factors. By natural factors, we're speaking of the climatic changes. So through the global warming, we tend to notice an increased rise in the sea level. How this affects the mangroves is that when the soil comes in, it tends to suffocate the mangroves, and in that way, these trees cannot breathe, or these trees cannot obtain the nutrients that they need for survival. What previously existed was a situation where a lot of mangroves were being cut down by the communities to provide for timber and firewood needs. This led to the destruction of huge acres of mangroves. We can have an example here. This is an example of a mangrove that was previously cut down. So what usually happens is the previously cut down trees do not regenerate. Once you cut them down, they hardly come back to life. So what we do as a project is come back in to replace the exploited trees, the degraded trees. This is one of the areas that was previously degraded. It was very much degraded to an extent where there were no mangroves in this area. So what Mikoko Pamoja has been able to do is replant the lost mangroves over the years. We do it every year. We are supposed to plant 4,000 seedlings in a year. Over the years, we've been able to observe a reduced rate in the exploitation of the mangroves by the local communities. This is because they've been able to realize the benefits that come along with the conservation or protection of these ecosystems in terms of increasing the productivity of the fisheries sector. The first people to notice the benefits of the mangrove ecosystems were the fishermen in this village. because after a long-term destruction of the mangroves, they noticed a decline in the amount of fish. So at that time, it was pretty easy to convince them that they need to protect this ecosystem for their own benefit, which was going to contribute to their livelihoods.
Mangrove are one of the most threatened natural ecosystems. And I can see that between 1990s and 2000, the loss of mangroves was 1 to 2%. And if the degradation was continuing in that rate, there could have been no mangrove in the next 100 years. The cost of doing nothing means we shall continue losing mangrove. And when we lose mangrove, we shall have effect on fisheries. There'll be no fish, there'll be no harvestable wood, there'll be a lot of, the most significant part is the sea level will rise. So it will lead to destruction of properties and life. And also, critically, there will be the increased carbon emission, and which is really the major concern now under Paris Agreement. We are the first country on earth to sustainably manage, protect mangroves, restore them by using carbon credits. And that project, Mikoko Pamoja, it's well known, is the first one which is led by the community, where the community are paid to protect their mangrove through the sale of carbon credit. So the credits that they sell, they are able to plow back and support water and sanitation, education, health, and also plant more mangrove. So that project is one of our innovative ones here in Kenya. Another part we have really worked very hard is we are trying to include mangrove in the climate change agenda, the nationally determined contribution. If that is done, we shall be able to accelerate our achievement of Paris Agreement and on the SDG.
So today we'll be having a monitoring activity. This is usually done thrice in a year. This is the third and final one this year. So basically what we'll be having today is dividing ourselves into the different groups. That is 3 groups of 7 members each, and then move forward to the plots, have a brief training with the community, and go ahead with the entire monitoring activity.
We are monitoring a number of plots, so we are running transects from the sea towards the land. So here we are doing a transect. So we identify one tree, we mark the tree. That is our origin, that's our tree number 0. So we do a plot, a 10 by 10 square plot. Then within the plot, we count the species of mangroves within the plot. We measure the diameter at breast height for the different species. Then we also, within the plot, we also check the young juvenile trees. Then we also want to check if within the plot there are any trees that have been cut. Then once we do that, we'll be able to capture everything within the plot, then we move on to the next one, so that in our analysis we'll be able to tell the larger area based on the different samples that we've collected. Yeah.
Okay.
So as a scientist with Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute, we are coming in today to support the community and the Mikoko Pamoja organization to actually monitor their forest. So we are bringing in the technical expertise to make sure everything is being done according to book, and they're following the laid down procedures and the laid down principles, so that they can actually sell their carbon credit in the market without any issue. Yeah, and with time actually transfer this knowledge to the community, so that over time they can actually be doing it on their own without our input. Today was interesting. From our observations, everything looks nominal. From the forest, we're seeing a lot of regeneration, which is good, which is a very good sign. But also on the other hand, we observed a number of stumps, so which clearly shows that there's some leakage coming from the forest. Basically, people are extracting wood from the forest. It's very minimal, but it's also interesting to note the areas so that we can actually improve surveillance. But so far, everything looks very, very good.
My name is Matimi Amadi. I am the tour guide from the Gazi Women. It's an ecotourism venture. Today we are celebrating about the launching on phase 1. We expect to get more visitors, local and foreign tourists. They come here to learn about the species of the mangrove and also the learning about the bird watching. It's about my family because my family, I am the one who I take care for anything. So I struggle myself to do better tour guiding so that I can get money to help my family.
I mean, there's the uniqueness of the mangroves, and there's also the benefit, the whole benefit that they bring to the universe. So a small effort in terms of conserving them or protecting them doesn't just only benefit the local communities, it benefits the whole globe. You're able to support the existence of life, not just the human life, but also the life of the other marine organisms that are located basically in the ocean too. I think it's essential for us to involve the younger generation in the conservation of these ecosystems, but more awareness is definitely needed out there. This should be a continuous process that only the younger generation will achieve in due time.
We need to live in harmony with nature. Nature will make us survive as humanity. We cannot distinguish, we cannot separate ourselves from nature. You have seen what COVID has done with all this restricted movement, with all this social distancing, the healing. For us to heal post-COVID, we shall heal because of natural ecosystems that are healthy and they are productive. So for my next generation, they need to understand the role of natural capital, which is the natural ecosystem, in climate change mitigation and sustainable development.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in business news. South Africa's power utility faces off with unions over salary hikes. And foreign ministers from the group of 7 nations are gathering with the pandemic, Russia and China top on the agenda.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Foreign ministers from the group of 7 nations are gathering in London for their first in-person meeting since the pandemic began. The pandemic, Russia and China are all major topics of discussion. CGTN's Navid Jabakil reports.
These are the first G7 meetings to be held in person in almost 2 years. That's because of COVID-19, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the pandemic is top of the agenda here. The 7 nations represent almost half of the world's economic output, and so their recoveries will matter for global growth. They're also facing pressure to do more to share vaccines with poorer nations. Climate change is another issue that's going to be important given the historical contribution the countries have made to global warming and the fact that the US and UK governments have made the environment key parts of their foreign policy.
I think we share a commitment both in our own countries but in the work that we're doing around the world to, as both the President and Prime Minister have recently said, build back better. And we see both necessity but also opportunity in the weeks and months ahead to do just that, to restore growth, but to do it in a more equitable fashion.
Aside from trade, security is going to be high on the agenda as well. What the UK is hoping to do is put on more of a united front against what it calls shared challenges in terms of dealing with Russia and China. British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab singled out Russia for spreading what he called disinformation and fake news, something Moscow strongly denies. Russia was in fact a member of the G8 itself before it was kicked out in 2014 over events in Ukraine. With regards to China, Raab has criticised the country over allegations of unfair trade practices, something Beijing denies and says it plays by global rules. But the non-G7 players here will also be of interest. There are 4 guest countries attending these talks: India, South Korea, Australia and South Africa. 3 of those 4 are in the Indo-Pacific, which is a region the UK wants to have more of an active role in. So what happens here this week will be watched closely in all corners of the world. Nawid Jabakil, CGTN, London.
To North Africa now, where Egypt's largest solar plant has secured $114 million in financing from a consortium of lenders to develop the project. The development of the Ombo solar plant will add 200 megawatts of energy capacity, increasing the share of renewable energy in Egypt's energy mix. From Cairo, here's Yasser Hakim with more details.
With the financing deal in place, the project, which was delayed due to the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, will begin production in the 3rd quarter of 2021. Experts say it's a unique private sector endeavor that will increase the share of renewable energy in the Egyptian power sector.
Other parks in Egypt are divided into small 50-megawatt solar projects by several companies. But for one individual company to establish a 200-megawatt power station, this is big. Another important aspect is that the future in renewables is not just solar energy, but solar energy using photovoltaic effects. It means to create solar energy using sunlight and not heat as was the case before. Light stays all day, but heat or temperature changes according to weather conditions. This project adapts to this updated system.
Saudi Arabia's Aqua Power, which is the company behind the project, says the plant's solar production will provide electricity to 130,000 households at the lowest rates in Africa. The project is backed by a host of lenders, such as the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the African Development Bank, and is seen as an important addition to Egypt's plans to transform into clean energy.
Egypt expects that in 2022, renewable energy will be 20% of its total energy output and 40% by 2030. This project will help in achieving that target. There is a study that shows if we make optimum use of the suitable areas in Egypt for clean energy, we can produce up to 90 gigawatts of electricity from renewable energy.
Egypt's total electricity output currently stands at around 58 gigawatts. The North African country's location makes it ideally positioned to tap into solar energy projects because of its sunny, warm weather year-round, especially in Upper Egypt, where the Komombo solar plant will be located. The Komombo project stands only a few kilometers next to another landmark, the Bimban Solar Park, the largest of its kind in Africa, producing 1.8 gigawatts of electricity. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
South African state power utility Eskom and its recognized unions are squaring off for the latest round of wage negotiations starting today. Workers' unions are demanding up to 15% in salary increase from the power utility, which is more than a $32 billion debt pile. Eskom did not disclose its position ahead of the talks, but as CGTN's Angelo Coppola reports, it has urged all parties to put the country's best interests first.
The utility has a debt burden of over $450